Well, here we go. Hi, everybody. Welcome to What's Next, Pretrial Justice in Ohio. I'm Cherise Fanner-Burdine, one of the folks who works at the Pretrial Justice Institute. We welcome you here today. I am the producer for today's event, which simply means I'm here to help with housekeeping. I will let you know that we are recording this, and this video will be posted on our YouTube channel, and that link will circulate so that we hope you're willing to share the link to folks who were not able to join us today, but who might be interested in this topic. We have quite a few people who are going to be speaking to you today. Zaria will run this webinar. And how can you participate? So hopefully you can see in the control panel of your Zoom window that you have a chat function. That chat function, you can put things to the panelists. And we will read questions. So as we go along, I will be monitoring that. If you have something you specifically want to send just to me, if you're having some difficulty, please go ahead and do that. You can select my name from that drop-down menu. Otherwise, please select panelists and let us know what your questions are. You're also free, I think. I haven't tested it from your perspective, but if you want to send just a comment into the general panelists and attendee box, you're also, I think, able to do that. So we'll save that for comments, and then any questions, it'll help me if it comes just to panelists so I can keep track of that. As I said, if you have any technical difficulties during this event, you're welcome to send a message to me. If you can't get through to me on this chat box, you can send an email to Cherise, which is spelled with my name right there, CHERISE @pretrial.org. With that, I will say thank you to Zaria for hosting this event and turn it over to her.
Thank you. We just want to, again, thank you all for participating. Thanks to our panelists as well as the participants. This has been an ongoing conversation here in the state of Ohio just around pretrial justice. I am serving as Senior Associate with Pretrial Justice Institute. I've been with the organization since July, and I work on the advocacy and community engagement team. So I have had the pleasure of working with all of these awesome panelists over the last almost year, just addressing various issues around pretrial justice here in our state. So I just want to go ahead and allow each of our panelists to introduce themselves, share a little bit about their organization and the specific work that they're doing here in the state of Ohio. And then we are going to have people address some specific questions that were predetermined, and then we'll also open it up to take questions from the audience. And then the final thing is we will show a slide about next steps, like how you can get engaged in some of the different work that's being done here in the state of Ohio. And our goal is to have a follow-up to this for some of our local efforts. We were able to host a pretrial educational event in Hamilton County. And so our goal is to follow up with Cuyahoga and then some of our other counties that we've started working with, Montgomery, Greene, and potentially Summit. So if there is interest in us doing that in your particular area, please feel free to reach out to me. I will make sure that my email address is in the chat box, so you'll have that as well. So let's go ahead and get started with just a quick introduction of our panelists, and we will start with David with the Bell Project.
Thank you, Zaria. My name is David Gaspar. I'm the Regional Director of Operations for the Bell Project. In Ohio, we currently have an operation in Cleveland, and we're actively working on opening up a location inside of Cincinnati as well. What the Bail Project is a national not-for-profit that pays the cash bail on behalf of individuals who are pretrial incarcerated. And upon release, we connect them to community resources to help them stabilize and move forward. And our effort is all to prove that pretrial incarceration is not necessary, but actively supporting individuals and their needs will allow them to be in a position to return to court for their open court dates.
Thank you. Next, we have Avery, who is showing up for racial justice.
Hi, y'all. It is really an honor to be on this call. There are some real powerhouses as part of this panel. So my name is Avery Martens. I'm up here in Cleveland, and I work with Showing Up for Racial Justice Ohio. And we really believe that racial and economic injustice are the foundations for which our systems are built, and that in order to transform our society, we have to build multiracial coalitions of everyday people willing to work for change. We also believe that white people have a lifelong responsibility to work toward racial justice and to help dismantle white supremacy in our culture, our institutions, and the way that we've actually internalized it personally. We have 7 chapters around the state. We do things like use of force monitoring, actually actively monitoring over 30 police stations for the use of force incidences. We have active decarceration campaigns that we work in collaboration with our community partners. We work on community police accountability and police commissions, such as the one here in Cuyahoga County in Cleveland. We're part of just a bunch of statewide networks that are really trying to build power for folks most impacted by injustice in the state. And I've also been supporting some statewide collaboration between grassroots leaders, helping to build deeper alignment and relationships across silos. So bridging gaps between racial and economic justice, drug policy, police accountability, and work against mass incarceration, all with a harm reduction lens. And this network is called the Creating Communities of Care Network. And it's also hosting weekly calls with decarceration leaders throughout Ohio for strategizing, sharing campaign information, and deepening our relationships in this work, because we're not only responding to what's happening with COVID-19 in this moment, but really trying to ensure that our work, which is so necessary for criminal justice reform, goes beyond this time.
Thank you. Next, we have Robin with Ohio Organizing Collaborative.
Thank you, Zaria. So my name is Robin Turner with Ohio Organizing Collaborative. I am a social justice organizer, And with this organization is a 501c3 nonprofit statewide organization focused on uniting community organizers, labor unions, faith organization, policy institutes across Ohio, and also organizing groups across Ohio.
Thank you. We have Melekte with ACLU.
Hi, everyone. Like Avery, I'm so honored to be on this panel with folks here. My name is Melekte Melaku. I go by she, her pronouns, and I work for the American Civil Liberties Union of Ohio. We're a national nonprofit advocacy organization that combines legal work and litigation to policy analysis, public communications, and organizing. I'm the organizing strategist for the northern region of Ohio, and really for the past 2 years, I've been working with all of these folks to build that groundswell public pressure towards bail reform. It's been a lot of public education. It's been a lot of mobilizing folks for change. And now we're entering our, our different campaign phase, developing our leaders, being very clear to the legislature on what we want for bail reform, and making sure that all of the pretrial reforms we've seen in response to COVID not only stay, but advance when we move the conversation into legislation.
Thank you. We have Crystal with the Cuyahoga County Office of Reentry.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am also very fortunate to be here amongst some strong powerhouses, as Avery stated earlier. So my name is Crystal Bryant. I currently serve as the director for our Cuyahoga County Office of Reentry. We are the first government office of reentry throughout the state of Ohio. I am the office's third director in terms of leadership here. So our job as an Office of Reentry is primarily to be a funder first. We provide dollars for programs and services that support those who are coming home from incarceration or those who have been touched by the justice system. We also serve as thought leaders, conveners, educators, and connectors. We don't provide advocacy work directly in a government office, as it is actually not allowable, but it is very personal to me and personal to those who are passionate and who serve in this office to ensure that you all are informed and you have the information needed to do your jobs on a daily basis. So there is a space for all of us. We are happy to be in this space. I take off my video just because it's too weird for me. My eyes look crossed, but I will add it back. And whatever questions you have for me, I am very fortunate to be here and look forward to answering them.
Thank you, Crystal. We have Stephen with Ohio Transformation Fund.
And thank you, Zaria, and also all of PJI for putting this together. So I work with the Ohio Transformation Fund. We support a lot of the groups on this call and others around the state that are advocating for all kinds of justice reform, deep systemic transformation that dramatically reduces incarceration, ends mass criminalization, finds holistically different ways of dealing with the conflicts that get called crime and are dealt with punishment right now and end up being made worse. We're really excited to support many groups that are supporting pretrial justice reform, bail reform of all kinds in this state, and looking forward to participating in the call.
Thank you. Chazidy with Ohio Organizing Collaborative.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chazidy Bowman, and I am with Ohio Organizing Collaborative. As my colleague before me, Robin Turner, gave you a rundown of who we are social justice leaders. And through Ohio Organizing Collaborative, birthed a digital organizing team called Ohio Prisoners Justice League. And what we do is we hit organizing for families at a different angle, and we make it a little bit more personal for them, and we service them and we aid them in things such as like bringing awareness to what their rights are, what's available to their loved ones that are incarcerated at this time through a pandemic, and how we can help and service them in that area. I am very honored to be here amongst some very great leaders. So to be on the stage with you guys is an honor to me. Thank you, PJI, for this opportunity.
Thank you. We have John with Hamilton County Public Defender's Office.
Thanks for having me. My name is John Kennedy. I am the director of the Common Pleas Division of the Public Defender's Office here in Hamilton County. I know because we have people from all around the state, not all the counties are doing things the same way. Our Public Defender's Office represents virtually all misdemeanors here in Hamilton County, and most of the felony cases are contracted out to private attorneys. But because of this pandemic, we have been working overtime to reduce the jail population here in Hamilton County. It's down about 30% as of today from where it was in the middle of March. It still needs to be lower, but we're hoping that what has happened in reducing the jail population, both with bond reductions and citing people to court, that we can kind of educate the judges here and push for more lasting changes when it comes to pretrial incarceration.
Thank you. And last but not least, we have Sasha with Ohio Justice and Policy Center.
All right, well, thank you. I'll bring up the end. Thank you, Zaria, for hosting this, and to PJI and to all of the awesome, brilliant panelists for the opportunity to be among you. So I'm Sasha. I'm an attorney at the Ohio Justice and Policy Center, and I'm the deputy director there. OJPC is a nonprofit public interest law firm, and our mission is to create fair, intelligent, redemptive criminal justice systems. As part of our work, we directly represent people who are incarcerated in jails, pretrial, post-conviction, and prisons post-conviction. We do policy work, so to change the system based on the experiences of people who are directly impacted. And we do a lot of community education, and we have been very closely involved in some of the bail efforts in Hamilton County and statewide.
Thank you. Thank you all. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And I'm going to start this actually with a question primarily directed to maybe John and Sasha. So in her letter to judges, our Supreme Court Chief Justice asked people to consider bond reviews with an eye towards lowering it and use of summons rather than arrest to assist in minimizing the jail population. So my question is, what changes have you all seen in the jail population? And this can be locally or if anyone else knows statewide as a result of COVID-19. And then also are you seeing lower bonds or no monetary bonds at all? So we can start with Sasha. It looks like it's unmuted, so we'll start with you, Sasha.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say maybe John can speak first to what you're seeing in our jail because you're on the ground completely there.
Sure. We have seen some difference in the number of cases. Our normal process, we have arraignments 6 days a week, and the numbers for those people who are locked up, who are showing up for arraignment, are lower than they have been in the past. They're still higher than they need to be, but what we have seen since the Chief Justice's letter, kind of a creeping back up of the numbers. What was supposed to happen was non-violent, low-level felonies and non-violent misdemeanors were all supposed to be cited to court. That has not happened. There are still low-level, as of this morning, there are F4s, F5s, non-violent, and non-violent misdemeanors that are locked up. Some of those are given an OR bond after spending a night in jail, but just based on this morning, only 25% were given OR bonds, and our jail numbers are creeping up. I think I appreciate what the Chief Justice has tried to do, but the problem is there's still too much discretion. And what Hamilton County has done, which is different than a number of counties, is Hamilton County has taken the position, the prosecutors have taken the position that because of the Chief Justice's administrative action, they have no duty to indict people before July 30th. They have no duty to give preliminary hearings, and they have no duty to give OR bonds. So while the sentiment from the Chief Justice was commendable, the judges here in Hamilton County, particularly the municipal judges who set all the bonds on felonies and misdemeanors for people who are locked up and charged within the past roughly 24 hours, that's been disregarded. Some judges, I would say there is a strong presumption toward an OR bond, and they're released without having to post any monetary bond. But, you know, as is, I'm sure everywhere, we have a number of judges who've not changed their bonds much, if any, because of this current pandemic.
And I'll echo that from what we've seen locally and statewide. So initially there was this drop in quite a few jails, not all of them, but in quite a few jails populations. And I want to commend the local public defenders for their massive effort here. Our jail in Hamilton County, which was initially built to hold about 800 to 850 people, had never had that population had gone as high as 1,600. And when the pandemic hit, we had about 1,250. And thanks to the public defender's efforts, it dropped as low as about 800. So that was a massive decrease. And then started, as John said, creeping back up. It is judge specific, it is county specific. There are a lot of places now that are encouraging cite and release. So we have to understand that jurisdictions throughout the state, there's different police departments, right? And they're going to do things differently. So even if you're in Hamilton County, where I am, you might have a cite and release policy from Cincinnati police, but in other parts of the county or other law enforcement in the county might not have that policy. And even where that policy is in place, like John was saying, we have a kind of overarching cite and release policy in Cincinnati during the pandemic, but that's not actually happening at every step because there's also discretion among individual officers. So also I'm seeing some more use of GPS monitoring, and maybe John, you can tell me thumbs up if that's also what you're seeing, or I guess thumbs down if we're, which is a negative, but yeah, exactly, thumbs sideways. So yes, there are fewer financial obligations set, and there's judges who are willing to reevaluate their financial obligations. Something, again, to commend the Hamilton County public defenders. They went to the judges and said, will you be willing to look at your lockup list? So these are people who were already sitting in a cage because they're not able to pay, and those judges were willing to reevaluate. That happens sometimes, not always. We've also seen judges summarily say they're not going to do that. And GPS has sometimes become the alternative.
I know, Avery, you've done some work, and I know there was a discussion around Cuyahoga in this, talking about this as well. If you want to provide some insight, that'd be great.
The thing that I was going to speak to about the decrease in population numbers and then this like climb back up are wondering in what ways that's contributed to by unsustainable practices and how they're getting the numbers in the jail facilities actually lowered. So for example, a couple weeks ago, there was a countywide webinar that was hosted in Cuyahoga County where Judge Brendan Sheehan, who's the administrative and presiding judge over the Common Pleas Court, actually let us know that his estimate was about half of the people that were released from jail were actually just sent to prison early. So there wasn't actually even a release, and it wasn't a practice that had long-term possibilities for keeping the numbers down. It was a one-time lower the number, but not actually something that was, it's not even, there's so many things that are frustrating about that, but saying that someone was released to prison is like, you're not even using that word correctly. So that was something that was really frustrating that we recently found out that's a contributing factors to numbers going down, sure, but it's not actually decreasing incarceration rates. And in fact, it's sending people, into hot spots that are potentially the largest in the world. So yeah, very frustrating.
Anybody else want to speak on this particular one? I know, David, you all are doing work in Cuyahoga with the jails. Anything that you all are noticing in your work?
To be honest, Avery really hit the nail on the head. Sending people to a different form of incarceration isn't freeing them. It's not helping them remove themselves from the possibility of infection or death. And so we need to be clear about what these numbers mean. A lot of these jurisdictions got a lot of praise for getting people out of jail. But that was also because we didn't understand the context of which they were framing the numbers. So when we know that they didn't release as many people as they said that they did, they just passed them on to a different form of incarceration. We need to be aware of that sooner. We also need to be more conscious of what cite and release has the potential to accomplish and not just make it a recommendation, but it needs to be more of an enforcement. If we know that it works for one, then it works for the many. And we need to keep people out of jail. And so in Cuyahoga County specifically, we see the use of it, but it is very discretionary.
I just wanted to follow up with some context. About a third of counties in Ohio have taken some steps to reduce their jail population right now. If it's through cite and release policies, if it's through things like mass plea hearings or hearings to lower bonds or bond reduction. So there's kind of been a varying degrees of effectiveness in terms of the reduction and how equitable or how fair it's been. Like if you take a county like Tri-County, they actually released people who are being held on misdemeanors as well as their pretrial population. And then you have folks, in Hamilton County, as John was saying, where there's so much discretion and disparate levels of implementation or enforcement of these new mandates. So it's kind of like it's not a clear landscape in terms of what every single county is doing. And I think that also speaks to an issue with bail, how there isn't standard data, there isn't standard reporting in the state of Ohio. And with COVID, that highlighted the same thing as well. We didn't have daily reports on the numbers of folks who are being infected. So I think all of these things are feeding on one another and compounding all of the issues that led us to pretrial reform in the first place.
Thank you. So we've had some conversations just through various portals, and we talked about like what are some of the good and some of the bad practices as far as what we've been seeing in COVID-19. So this is open to any of the panelists, and we'll just ask you to unmute yourself as you're speaking. But are you all seeing changes, and this kind of follows up to what we were just talking about, seeing changes in practice that we would want to actually keep after the pandemic is over? What are some of the positive things that we are seeing, and then what are some of the things that we still want to continue to tackle? And this is open to any of you all, your thoughts.
I'll jump out there first. So cite and release, it allows an individual to actually retain their employment. It allows them to retain their housing, potentially not lose their children, keep the relationships intact. Cite and release is a great program if it's actually utilized uniformly. And so that's one of the good things that we've actually been able to see a little bit more willingness to implement. And so I would like to see that actually continue to grow in its support as well as in its use.
I absolutely agree with that. That's been the biggest thing that I hope can be a change for good in the future, is just citing people to court, because as was already mentioned, you know, that doesn't destabilize an individual as much if you cite them to court. But also, I think, being an attorney, maybe I'm thinking more on this aspect, but it is so much easier for a judge to continue to keep someone locked up if they come out in stripes than it is if they come in from off the street, they have their normal clothes on. I think there's a psychological aspect of that cannot be overstated, because I think people who cite into court, that also will reflect in potential sentence at the end. If someone's cited to court and can show up to their court dates, that shows the judge very easily that, hey, I can comply with what I'm supposed to comply with, so I should get a chance at probation. I don't need to be incarcerated as a punishment. And citing to court is, I think, a big thing to help. And I would hope that it continues in the future. The one thing I've been disappointed with is there's just too much discretion. I think it just needs to be mandatory. Cite at least at the very minimum, every nonviolent misdemeanor and nonviolent felony 4, felony 5, cite them to court every time, because as long as there's discretion, you're going to have people who don't care about mass incarceration continue to incarcerate people.
I'll jump in with a few more. So one of the pieces that came out of the pandemic is we've looked at the conditions within the jail, and do we have safe and healthy conditions? Are we monitoring the number of cells that the jail was built with versus the number of people, so that we're not overcrowding? And in light of the pandemic, those things became front of mind, and I think those should stay front of mind. And the response to, we have multiple people in cells, was not to build more jails during the pandemic, because it's not practically possible. It was, how do we remove people? So that's another piece that I hope stays, is judges were willing to relook at their decisions. And that's not a thing judges often like to do. There's some mechanisms in the law to get them to do that. But the ability to think back and say, this wasn't the right condition to put the person under, or these financial conditions were too high. The fact that judges are looking at ability to pay, in part because public defenders like John are forcing them to consider how many people they're caging, is a positive that I hope stays. The fact that judges are encouraged to issue fewer or no bench warrants when a person is unable to come, that's a positive. So sometimes a person misses their hearing date for a variety of reasons we understand. And we're thinking about that now, because during the pandemic, we get it. People don't want to travel out, or they may have other life obligations. So considering people's life obligations, their health, their safety issues that prevent them from coming to court, that should also continue. And one other thing that I'm seeing that I do want to note that's a positive is we're using technology better. And we're funding ways that people who might not be able to come to their probation appointment or to their hearing, and we know there's a lot of reasons like childcare, transportation, where people might not be able to do that. We're thinking creatively about how to have somebody be present when they're not physically able to come. That can be a double-edged sword, because sometimes there's a good reason to have somebody's physical presence, and they should have that right if that's what they need for getting their full representation and defense. But it is good that we're thinking about ways to use technology to overcome some of the life hurdles that people face when they're in the justice system.
So I'll just pipe in that we have a question from the audience, which I would like to ask, which is, prior to summons or citations, is the opportunity to deflect completely. And so are you all seeing any widespread use of deflection where law enforcement is actually deflecting people to behavioral health or public health services as opposed to even citing them? Ohio has a number of innovative deflection sites. And so I'm curious if you're seeing an increase in that. John, you look like you've not even heard of this, which saddens me. So why don't you start?
I've absolutely heard of it. I just know our police departments down here, and I don't know of one police officer who has ever used that avenue. Okay. It's the best case scenario. Usually you're charged and you're cited to court. And that is just, I think that comes down as I don't know if it's a lack of education or a refusal of police to use those other avenues rather than the criminal justice system as a way to address an issue. But I have not heard of any deflection.
Other folks seeing deflection? Okay, as you keep going on things you're seeing that are positive, the question then becomes from another caller, how do you advocate to make what you do like and the positive things you are seeing? What is the avenue for making these temporary policies permanent? So I know, Zaria, you're gonna probably try to get to that throughout the rest of the talk, but just wanted to make sure Larry got his question heard.
Thank you. And actually, we're going to talk a little bit about what people would like to see, and then we'll kind of go into reentry after that. But when we talk about, for those people who are kind of in the organizing world, when we talk about like the strategies and after hearing what we just heard, how can communities articulate and enforce their values and desire for justice and well-being during and after this pandemic? And basically, how can we continue this from a community perspective and an organizing perspective? So we have several, obviously, organizers on this call. So whoever would like to go first?
I can go.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
So I think from a community perspective, I think that our churches play a big part, play a really, really big role in our communities. And I think that they have the most impact on our communities and decisions that we make. I know here locally, here in Hamilton County, they truly make a big impact in trying to connect the leadership there to come together to make the people in the community feel safe and feel comfortable about advocating, because a lot of times people, either they don't know how to advocate, they're afraid to advocate, or they're just uncertain about it. So I think that if we could bring our faith-based leaders together in our communities to make this space more comfortable for people to advocate, I think that would make a really big difference on that level.
Thank you. Robin, you're about to say something as well.
Yes, thank you, Zaria. So what has been happening here in Cuyahoga County and what we've been doing? We've been on strategy calls twice a week around doing some outreach to some judges here in Cuyahoga County. We've collaborated with a couple of faith institutions on 105, and we've been sitting down speaking to the council people in regards to just the whole COVID pandemic, and just seeing some of the things continue, but just us collaborating collectively, just on it, and just speaking to the judges and seeing which judges is yes for it and which judges is no, and which judges are in the middle, to try and bring some change right here in Cuyahoga County.
And I want to follow up with Robin said in terms of collaboration, and also recognizing that there are two sets of targets when we organize. So on the local level, you have like your county executive, you have your county sheriff, and there are bail reform policies that you could advocate for within closer proximity to your targets. So in Cuyahoga County, as an example, we're trying to get electronic monitors. We want to eliminate all of the fines and fees related to pretrial electronic monitoring. And so on a regional level, we're, we have a petition, we're demanding that Administrative Judge Sheehan take on the costs of those devices, and we're building our volunteer grassroots capacity to advocate for bail reform and see some of those smaller wins. And I think this leads into what does this look like when we have regional forces all over the state ready to advocate for very clear legislation that's informed from these smaller fights. So ideally, if we win this petition in Cuyahoga County, when we go to Columbus, we can say, here in Cuyahoga County, we saw that, not charging folks for these devices really helped their case because they didn't have to worry about paying that money, and they were able to defend themselves and be in conversation with their lawyer because they weren't incarcerated. And we want to put that within the legislation itself. In, Hamilton County, that could look different because your sheriff isn't appointed like ours is. So the organizing tactics are a little bit different. But I think the advocacy comes in steps, and it starts with strong regional bases with clear asks and clear targets.
Any other thoughts as it relates to how communities can articulate and enforce their values and desires for justice and the well-being during this time and after, as well as how will the community's needs after this, relate to pretrial justice? So what does this look like for each of you when you think about post-COVID, in our system here?
Well, I want to stress that some of the actors that we've been talking about that have an impact on pretrial justice, we were talking about prosecutors, elected position, judges, elected position, Hamilton County Sheriff, elected position, keeping in mind that police, while not elected, is what we talk about very often in pretrial justice, but I do want to point out that they are connected to elected positions, but there are a lot of directly elected positions, and that's a way to be heard. And then I want to add another piece that in the long term, to keep some of the good policies, this kind of harkens back to a previous question, something like a cite and release policy. The data that's going to be gathered right now will probably inform a lot of what gets to stay and go and how we discuss it in the future. And I so much appreciate that we're doing more cite and release, and I agree that it should be presumptive for a lot of cases. But that's not the end of the story. So for something like that, if we want to be part of making it permanent, we have to remember that now people are being cited and released, and they're getting these pieces of paper that may or may not clearly say a court date. The court date's going to be moved several times because of the pandemic stuff happening. And they may have every intention to come, but just don't even know when and where they're supposed to go. So because of those issues, the data may not come out as well as it could. So part of being a community voice is thinking through like the next 3 steps forward. So if you or someone within your community gets a cite and release citation, knowing to call your local public defender so that you can make sure you know what your court date is, knowing how to contact that local court. So keeping those communications just among people, it's an interpersonal piece that keeps the momentum going.
Sasha touched on something really important. Understanding who the key players are, understanding who is elected and who is appointed, but ultimately understanding that they are supposed to represent our interests. They're supposed to act upon what we would like to see implemented in our society and in our communities. So understanding who's elected, how they're elected, that education piece is really important. It's also important to know who that is elected is appointing to certain positions, because also you want to put that pressure on them to appoint the proper people that once again reflect our best interests in what we would like to see. But I think when we're talking about what the community can do, the community, and John had touched on this earlier, there's a psychology that goes along with seeing people incarcerated, seeing somebody in an orange jumpsuit, there's an automatic assumption that there's some sort of guilt assigned to that outfit or to that condition of pretrial confinement. And in psychology, it's actually called blind spotting. And it's where you look at an image and there could be two different things that you could see. So in Rubens' vase, there's the silhouette of two faces looking at each other. But in the void of the faces, it outlines a vase. So a lot of people will see the vase initially and some people will see the two faces. But what ends up happening is whatever your default is, be it the vase or the faces, that's what you will always see the first time that you look back at that image until you train yourself to see something different. And so what we have are politicians, we have elected officials, we have appointed officials who see an orange jumpsuit. They don't see a father, they don't see a mother, they don't see a brother, they don't see an actual human being. They either see numbers on a spreadsheet that are very easily moved from incarcerated to dead. They don't see the person. So as community members, we need to remind our elected officials and the appointed officials that these are human beings. I believe that Sasha had also mentioned earlier that, you know, a lot of the things that we see right now are them looking at living conditions. That's a human element. We need to continue pushing that narrative. We need to continue reminding our officials that these are human beings that we care about. These are human beings that we're willing to stand up and fight for. And if our voices aren't enough, then let our ballots speak for us. And so I think educating ourselves as to what those positions are, what they influence, how they impact the decisions that are being made, and then actually executing on that knowledge is going to be the most powerful thing that our communities can do.
I also think getting very clear about the process that we're taking to move as a collective political unit. So if that's on the ballot box, if it's pushing for regional campaigns and making sure you're supporting other regional campaigns, I think bill reform in Ohio, our next step is being very clear on how we're aligned and how we're collectively moving towards this other vision of pretrial justice and just our alternative vision of justice that we want to see.
Any other thoughts on this particular area as it relates to community engagement in this space and interacting with some of our stakeholders currently and post-COVID? All right.
So, good at what David said. I was having technical difficulties. Can y'all hear me? Okay. I wanted to speak a little bit to what David said, and I'm working on right now about the humanizing part of this. I think that in order to gain the attention and a lot of momentum from people that aren't truly affected by this, like they don't have someone that's incarcerated or they don't know anything about this, to draw those people in, I think we need to humanize dealing with this situation right now, because I'm working with a family of Lawrence Miller who he had kidney failure, was on dialysis going into prison, and now he has passed due to COVID-19, and he only had 9 months left on his sentence. So now that we have made a social media campaign, humanize him, it has brought people that normally wouldn't even ask about justice reform to the forefront to say, hey, something's wrong here. You know, so I think that the humanizing aspect is very, very important right now and what we're dealing with, because it will draw those people, and then after COVID is over and all this is over, it has brought so much awareness to them that they will continue to stay in this fight with us.
Thank you. All right, so I'm gonna pull Crystal in. So when we're talking about people being released, obviously, people are looking to the various offices of reentry and other programs in their local areas to get some support. And so how are people who are being released currently just from our jails being supported in the community during this time? And what do you see are some of the biggest issues? And this can be anyone, but I'm throwing it out there to her, obviously, because she's in one of the offices of reentry.
So I think someone has already spoken about the challenge of, it could have been the attorney that's on the phone. Every county kind of operates differently. And so from DRC's perspective, they actually have an Office of Reentry and Enterprise Services. And what they've chosen to do as a statewide approach for their Office of Reentry is provide more of a case management role during the COVID outbreaks. So what they've committed to is to ensure that everyone is pre-enrolled in Medicaid on their way home, and that they try their very best to provide some type of housing support before they release anyone. And if individuals are positive with COVID, they get information and education about how to take care of themselves as they transition back into the community. So from a statewide perspective with 88 counties that look very differently, I certainly can understand why they believe this is the best approach. However, it creates a plethora of problems for each county. So Cuyahoga County has had the highest number of returnees for over a decade at this point. And so when you think about those transitional issues, well, one, you had the governor state a few days ago that the Department of Education and Medicaid benefits will be cut as a direct result of the deficit we are facing from the pandemic and no tax revenue. So when you think about Medicaid, it is very likely not only will it impact seniors, it's definitely going to impact those who were afforded Medicaid as single adult individuals through the Affordable Health Care Act. And so those that are pre-enrolled on their way back home look like those that are formerly incarcerated. So even with that pre-enrollment, that will probably be slashed or cut relatively quickly. Secondly, there's no one to follow up on that Medicaid benefit. So the idea of pre-enrollment sounds fantastic, but once they're out of DRC space who started the application, that person is then on their own to make that transition and do the follow-up calls to ensure they even have health care. So if they've been exposed to COVID and or have COVID and they're being released and they're straight released, so no supervision, there's an issue there. And then there's an issue in terms of who do you get healthcare services from? Everything looks differently. And I get we're getting to slowly transition to opening back up within the next week or so, but everything looks different. The community looks different. And so where do I go for these spaces and places to even make sure I'm healthy and I'm okay? And what's a telephonic health appointment? So those are things that we're just kind of, navigating along the way. And then there's the whole issue of homelessness. So at a national scale, we already know that 15% of the men and women returning home end up in our homeless shelters. So imagine if a homeless shelter was already on an average day over capacity, now they have to be at 50% capacity as a result of the pandemic and implement certain strategies. So what happens even if I had familiar support to come home, if I'm positive with COVID and that person I was coming home to is elderly or have children or have family members with underlying conditions, I may not be able to come home to you under this pandemic, at least for a while until I quarantine myself and I get healthy. I can't go to a shelter because they have 50% capacity when we know that they really need double the capacity they already have. And then we have to think about, how do you even get information for resources and services? We're fortunate here in Cuyahoga County to be quite resource rich. We have a one-stop shop reentry resource center, but this particular pandemic, they're closed. So a lot of our nonprofits that provide these services, which you would go to as a one-stop method, are closed and you can't access the service. So again, I understand DRC's perspective, but it's certainly on our local leaders when you talk about who's appointed, who's advised, and who's elected to do their due diligence within our county, because we know best what our county looks like. So here in Cuyahoga County, and none of these things are like rocket science. They're just, things we're doing our best to do, because you have to be able to think about what are you responsible for and what can you implement without the assistance and support of a whole lot of different agencies that you don't have control over. So we've took the drive-through model that the food bank has statewide at this point, but Cuyahoga County is very fortunate to have a really good food bank. We got their policies and their health measures about how to operate this. North Star now operates a drive-through on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We also created a walk-up process as a result that we recognize some individuals coming home may not have a family member to lean on that has a car, or maybe it could be, an old associate who may not be into the right things, and we don't want them taking that risk doing a ride alone just to try to get some of these basic resources and link with the transition specialist. So we created a walk-up process as well. We created a flyer, we passed it off to DRC. Their promise to us is that they would upload it into JPay. So if those who are residents of a correctional facility have access to it prior to coming home. We've been in contact with our parole offices here, and we've shared that flyer information with our APA office. We work with our halfway houses, so they also understand individuals are open and welcome to come to the drive-through. We have something in Cuyahoga County called the Exodus Planner, which is a digital guide for going home to stay. And so what we've asked the provider of the going home to stay guide to do is to create a COVID-19 page. And so for those nonprofits who have decided to have limited hours or digital services that they're providing during the COVID. It's a one-stop way that they can access this information and know where to go. We created a Google Doc, and so we do, daily blast to our providers to update their information in our Google Doc so that we can then transfer that over to the provider who updates the COVID-19 page for us. And so people can have access to it electronically and know what is being offered. And I also talked a little bit about just making sure people have the information. So it may sound, again, simple or ridiculous and not that big of a deal, but most people don't realize that daily DRC, through advocacy of organizations like the Ohio Transformation Fund, who is represented on the call today, was able to get DRC to commit to daily putting out your numbers, because people wouldn't know that, we're like top 10 in the United States for positive COVID cases. You wouldn't know that the whole Marion and the whole Pickaway is on lockdown because you think about numbers, right? But even in those numbers, it's powerful and it's impactful for you all to have. So not only is it a link on our website to those resources, we also do daily emails for those who sign up and request it about the positive numbers in our jail, about Elkton in our federal penitentiary, and in our state prisons. We also talk about our juvenile systems because the numbers are beginning to grow for Ohio Department of Youth Services. And I think as of today, or it could have been Friday, we had our first positive case of COVID in our juvenile jail here in Cuyahoga County. So, those are the types of things that we do. DRC committed their process of their testing plan to writing on May 4th. Those things are at the bottom of our webpage as well. The FAQ to DRC provided at the bottom of our webpage. And then as individuals come through, if they kind of slip through the cracks, they've been calling our office, and we do our best to support and kind of step in to a case management space to make sure they are linked and they have the proper resources. We're working on a plan right now with our Department of Homeless Services to think about how do we integrate those coming home who are homeless into that system. Because the shelter is at 50% capacity, it is probably something that will not be highly profiled or publicized, but we are definitely in discussions. I have a call the day after this one, so we can kind of work on the final details of what that looks like, because it's not good enough to just say, I sent you home with a bus ticket and, go live with your mama. Good luck. We're also in conversation with our Board of Health. So if I can say that anything has come good out of this that I would like to continue, is the ability to collaborate with systems. Because we love to compartmentalize people in the government, and they're not just my reentry people. If you don't have housing, and they become your homeless population. So if it's a public health crisis, they become your issue. So how do we collectively work together to serve people? So that has been promising out of this, because I've been able to get people on the phone who usually it just doesn't happen, to be honest.
Gotcha. And I know in Hamilton County, thank you, Crystal. I know in Hamilton County, there was a setup monthly in our jail where people who were transitioning from the jail and even people from the outside could go down. I'm not really sure what is happening with that as it relates to as people are transitioning out of the jail now, what resources and supports, being that they aren't physically, in the jail set up. But any other thoughts around reentry as people are leaving the jail system and getting them plugged into resources and services?
My experience in Hamilton County has been that a lot of the reentry support organizations are still functioning, but they're functioning in a very different way. So to your point, Zaria, they're not physically coming in to do work within the jail, and a lot of the case management and other intake work is now happening remotely, which means that a person has to have access to certain things like internet or phone or whatever. And while for some people that makes it easier, for other people without that in-person connection, it can make it harder. Some organizations have changed their hours and have changed what services they're able to offer. I've heard that housing has been a challenge for people who don't already have it when they went into the jail system, who don't have family or somebody else who will help them. So I want to commend local reentry organizations, because they're, I think, doing their best in a very strange time, but also to acknowledge the fact that it's more challenging for them to provide services. And I'm hearing this directly from them.
Any other thoughts or feedback?
So I just want to speak to something that I heard her say as far as ODRC and upon release, as far as who's positive, who's not, testing before release. I do understand what ODRC's intent is, but as we are seeing, their intent is not what their action truly is. And yes, I respect the numbers that they place on their website, but I'm also seeing that those numbers aren't real and true. And I do have a list of people who are being released statewide without testing, and then they ended up testing positive after returning home. So I think at some level we have to press down on ODRC and hold them responsible for this, because we are filtering people back into the communities that are testing positive, and they may have a plan for housing, but after they test positive, then they don't have anywhere to go. So it just leaves them in a place to where, now what do we do? What do I do? I'm positive and I can't go back to the house that I was in because my mother's elderly. You know, I also think that with that being said, the reentry programs here, I think in Hamilton County, I think the halfway houses have, correct me if I'm wrong, the halfway houses have shut down to a certain degree and they're not accepting people in or out. So I think we really need to focus on, one, keeping ODRC truly responsible for how they're releasing people and how they're getting that information, because a lot of my people and their families that are coming to me that we service every day, they're not receiving that information on COVID or what's available to them after release. They're just being released back into society. So I think that ends up falling on people that do have limited resources with reentry on how we're going to help these people when they're just basically being put out on the street without any resources. So I think we need to hold our ODRC a little bit more responsible to their intent that they are placing in us.
And I just want to be clear for the people who are following us that what Chazidy is speaking to is actually for people who have been incarcerated in the prisons when we're talking about ODRC versus the jails. And so with the jails, it's more of on a local level. And so our offices of reentry try to balance both. So oftentimes they are dealing with people who are being released from the jail population as well as people who are being released from our prisons. And so so they are trying to balance a little bit of both as it relates to connecting people with resources and services. So I just want to make sure that people know the distinction between the two. And unfortunately, our offices of reentry are responsible for everybody that are coming out and working with various organizations. And so people who are being released from the jail are not going to necessarily have access to the same resources and services that are maybe often offered to people who are being released from the prison setting. So I just wanted to kind of make that clear. So this is going to be our last question for the panelists before we open it up to people in the audience. And I know we have like one question that is open that I can see in the little box, and Sharice will be able to tell us. But for each of you all, what is your organization currently doing that the public can engage in to persuade public officials? So how are you all working with public officials, policymakers, and then how can members of our community get engaged in the work that you all are doing in that space? We can start with Stephen, since
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Thanks. Thank you. Yeah. Well, I may or may not be the right person for this question, only because as a funder, that's rarely our role. Like, we aren't usually leading the charge on advocacy, we're supporting. Mm-hmm. So I will say that the ACLU has really led the charge with having some statewide petitions. I know that Chazidy and Robin and the OOC have really done a phenomenal job with gathering stories, and they continue to do so. They have a website, which you all can post if you want. I don't know if it's still active, but in terms of gathering the individual stories of people directly impacted by these local jail policies, by what's going on in the prisons. Of course, today I'm thinking about pretrial justice, so I'm thinking specifically about these bail practices. So those are the kinds of stories that would be really important to gather. And I think I'm pretty sure David and the Bail Project is doing that too regularly. That's what you always do. So, you know, it's stories, and then, you know, just joining the mass of signing on to the petitions that are out there. There was a statewide letter that we sent to Governor DeWine, mostly focused on state level, you know, prison incarceration. And we've certainly gotten into that a lot today. But of course, once we're talking about state prison, we're long past the pretrial phase of the world. But still, it's important, I think. I know that, you know, Avery here and others, I think Robin at least, and others have been connected in some way to the Cuyahoga County Jail coalition there, Stop the Inhumanity at the Cuyahoga County Jail. They've got some really powerful actions. I know they're continually calling people to action through Facebook. And you could, if you're in Cuyahoga County, that's a phenomenal group to join because they're the most active there in terms of holding the local jail accountable, the local justice actors accountable, the ones who are responsible for setting these pretrial policies. And, you know, I think, you know, that's what comes to my mind. And so OTF itself has nothing to offer directly other than all these phenomenal people that are on this call. I just want to like point the finger at all them and be like, sign up for their things.
Got you. Again, this is what are your organizations specifically doing right now around pretrial, and how can the public engage to really have an impact with the public officials, like in your area, that would be beneficial for people to know about?
So on May 27th, the ACLU of Ohio is going to host a statewide campaign call. This is going to be an opportunity to kind of do an all-around review of what's happened on the bail reform campaign within the past year and a half, look at all of our tactics. This is also going to be an opportunity to plug into regional teams so you can run some of these smaller pretrial reform campaigns and then, you know, contribute to this larger statewide strategy. And if you're in Cuyahoga County, we have a weekly bail reform working group that's connected to the Jail Coalition and in support of a lot of decarceration campaigns throughout the state. This working group, in partnership with the coalition, is pushing the electronic monitoring petition. And if you wanted to see something similar happen in Franklin County or Hamilton, we can all work together with, you know, policy folks on this call and determine what are the policy asks and what are the containers or the processes to get those folks to pressure their public officials. So this could mean pressuring your sheriff if you're in Cincinnati. This could mean pressuring Armin Budish, our county executive in Cleveland. So we're going to be developing that infrastructure and that framework. So feel free to hop on that call. And then if folks just want to have a one-to-one with me and just hear more about the bail reform campaign and what is the policy platform that we're pushing for, I'll leave my email in the chat box.
I just wanted to echo how incredible Melekte's leadership has been with the bail reform working group here in Cleveland, Cuyahoga County. They're just a powerhouse of incredible volunteers, and the work that they're leading is just amazing. So definitely just want to shout out how powerful that group is.
You know, I thought of one thing, Zaria, I'm sorry if I might just double back, I'll keep it super short, is to the extent there's like all the very tangible demands, right? You sign this petition, be part of this campaign, state, local, sheriff, judge, prosecutor, you know, that's important. We got to be strategic and focused and, you know, have demands. The other thing, because I'm looking at this slide that got put up, it's great in the resources. And it reminded me that in social media land, to the extent that that's relevant, and it is a little bit, is to be consistent in saying the things that matter and not saying the things that don't. And that means just what I think Chazidy has done such a phenomenal job repeatedly today, emphasizing the human nature. Like you'll see that in some of our big public actions, again, beyond pretrial, like when we're talking about prisons and other things, but the messaging is actually the same across all these issues. Their health is our health. Like if you want a real simple like theme and impact and hashtag, it's like posting things that reminds everyone that the people who are incarcerated are human beings just like us, and their health is our health. It's all seamlessly integrated. And so there's some more things if you want to get like tips on fine tuning how and what you post and how you talk about things in Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and all that stuff. definitely let me know. That's one thing I'm passionate about, getting people clear about that. But a lot of the work to develop that narrative and that clarity has come through the ACLU, the Stop the Humanity at the Cuyahoga County Jail Coalition, the OOC, others have done a lot of deep work on this and making sure that racial equity is front and center and the humanity of incarcerated people is always front and center.
Do we have any other thoughts about or comments around the work that your organization is doing? And I'll kind of follow up and just ask, like, for those who are working with some of the policymakers, like, how are those relationships developed? And you all talked a little bit about some of the various coalitions and things like that. How can people, and I know we have the link of resources here, but how can people get involved with those coalitions? I know we spoke to ACLU, but what about some of the other people that are currently on the call?
Hey, Zaria, can I just make a comment real quick in regards to what some of the things up close that OOC is doing?
Absolutely.
Okay, so twice a week we have a strategy call around the whole COVID things and how we can support the men that's inside. What we're also doing, we're also gathering individual stories from the men that's actually locked up. So they're sending letters basically telling how things have happened there, how they're not telling the whole story from there. Actually, a friend called me this morning saying there was a message on their JPay about the COVID in regards to how to stay safe, basically using 70% alcohol to wipe down the area. But the problem with that is they don't give them no cleaning supplies. So they're telling you how to stay safe, but they're not giving you the things in order to stay safe with. So we're getting stories from those men, from those men on the inside, so we can actually be able to post on our website, because what's being said out here per medium is not what's really happening on the inside. So that's another campaign that we're doing in regards to gathering stories, as well as the strategy session twice a week around the local judges and our next action.
Thank you. I'm gonna give Sharice the opportunity. I think there was one question, and then we'll allow others to, if there's other things that we want to just share to list it.
Actually, Chazidy, I saw you were about to say something. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, well, what Robin said that we're doing with OOC, and then my digital organizing team, Ohio Prisoners Justice League, we are doing an aggressive campaign starting this week to petition representatives. So if anybody wants any more information on that, I put my name and my contact information in the chat, but we're going to start an aggressive campaign to lead up to our next action on June the 5th. And we will be working with Avery and others statewide to collaborate those efforts. But yeah, please connect with us on that if you are part and want to know how you can help us advocate.
So just a reminder that if you have questions, you can put them in the chat box. For the panelists, if your email addresses are not on the slide that's up and you have not already popped them in the chat box, please pop them in the chat box. When we post this video on YouTube, unless you call me and tell me not to post your email address, I will post it in the caption on YouTube so folks know how to get a hold of you. While we're waiting, oops, did I changed the slide view, sorry. You know, you get what you pay for, Azaria. I am free labor today. So I have a question that I wanted to ask John. Beyond why did you wear a tie? The question really is, I know, we gotta show that public defenders are cool. What is your sense, other than frustration, what is your sense about whether it's mostly narrative, mostly data, a combination of narrative and data, or bribery? What is it that would help us move the system actors that you walk up and down the hallways with in the old days when you walked in the hallways? What is it that you think would make a difference if in fact COVID is not making the difference in terms of a changed lens on pretrial detention? Easy question, John.
Firstly, I was in court today. That is why I have a tie on. I'm still in the office.
That's a good, all right, that's good.
In terms of what I think could work, I think narratives are definitely important, but so is data. And what I've come across more is our office has tried to increase our community outreach and try to get more publicity for the injustices that happen here in the county, is just a lack of education. We have started to work with, well, we started I think in January or February of this year, a couple city council people here in Cincinnati and I was surprised initially because, you know, everybody on this call is in this world that they know so much about, but when you talk to people who aren't in this world, sometimes there's a gap between what you're talking about and what they have as fundamental or foundational information or knowledge. And I was surprised at how little was known about how the criminal justice system operates in the county, and how little our elected representatives knew. And I mean, our judges are all elected, our sheriff is elected, and that most of the felony judges are up for election this November. The sheriff just lost his primary. But I think the biggest thing to help move the needle on this is publicity. And the judges hate bad publicity. When there's an article written about a decision they've made, a comment they've made, things like that, I think that goes a long way. And, you know, because fundamentally, some judges are never going to care on a personal basis about the individuals they incarcerate each and every day. But they do care about getting reelected. And that is something that they will at least think twice about making bad decisions if they know that there's going to be more accountability in the public sphere and more transparency in terms of what happens. And that is something that, you know, I know during COVID, one of my attorneys got a bond reduced for a client. That client was released. And then there was an article on Cincinnati.com that was inaccurate, but also made the judge revoke the bond and increase the bond again because of the publicity. And that is something that, you know, we have tried to increase that awareness, but data goes far, I think, in terms of just letting the community know at large what's going on. But nothing beats a story of an individual caught up in a system that's unfair, and all the problems that arise from that. And so, you know, it's a combination of both, but I think what resonates most with individuals is a personal story. I told a personal story at a career day at a local elementary school about one of my clients in the unfairness of what he had to go through. And, you know, this is a fifth grader who grabbed me after and brought over a friend and wanted me to tell the friend the story that I told. And this is with elementary school kids. It resonates. And I only talked to that group for about 15 minutes because they were on a rotating basis, but that goes a long way. And until the public at large realizes that these are people and not crimes, there's only so much that can happen.
So I have a question. This is primarily to everyone. So as we're kind of, we don't have a lot of questions coming in, but as we are coming to a close, I would like to hear from everybody's thoughts about what do you think are our next steps? Like if you could just kind of summarize, what do you think our next steps should be here in Ohio as it relates to pretrial justice and what we want to see happen as a state? So looking at not only locally, but statewide efforts, what are your thoughts? I'll let everybody take a minute to think about that. I see some people like, You can just unmute.
I'll jump in since nobody's biting. Some of the really good things that we're seeing in some places where there is OR happening more often. As a next step, we might look to use those places as examples for some statewide reform. The way that conditions for pretrial and financial conditions are set is in part governed by some state level laws and policies that are kind of in several different places, but we could push for something that is a presumptive release on own recognizance for a variety of circumstances. And I think one of my co-panelists had mentioned that, but where there's a presumption of no financial conditions, own recognizance, full release, let's say for all misdemeanors, felony 4s and felony 5s, then it would create a lot more statewide bail practice improvements.
Thank you. Any other thoughts as far as what do you all want to see as far as next steps here in our state for pretrial specifically?
I'd really like to see the regional and statewide vehicle for reform get shaped during this pretrial period. So what would it look like if we ran regional campaigns in Cuyahoga County, Cincinnati, Allen County, and get connected with those folks who are in places where they can get in contact with their sheriff or their county administrator very well and open that dialogue with elected officials. I'd also like to see the conversation around what is pretrial liberty, what does it mean to honor someone's presumption of innocence, and just really push forward that conversation of our version of justice in Ohio doesn't work. What does an alternative vision of justice look like? And just alignment on messaging there. And I'd really like to see more creative and innovative organizing like Chazidy's been spearheading right now. If we can't protest in person, what does a car rally look like? What does a thunderstorm or a Twitter storm look like with 6,000 to 7,000 people in coordination?
Thank you. Other thoughts?
As folks are answering, also we got a question. We haven't touched specifically on immigration detention in Ohio, but if you have thoughts about how, or if you can report out on anything that your organizations are doing vis-a-vis immigration.
Thank you.
I would like to see maybe if we form a database of the network, like a one-stop shop that we could all go to, and it would just be a go-to place of like Zaria, OOC, PJI, like have all of us in one place in a database set up. Because I think that if we had that, then our efforts would be more effective because we would know where to go. We would have a go-to. So I would love to see a database set up, and I know that it's been out in other spaces, but I would love to see that go in action sooner than later.
And when you, Chazidy, when you say a database, is this something that the public could access as far as like different resources based on like their particular area of need? Yes, absolutely. Because I think we're falling short if they don't know what's truly available to them, and where we are short of hands resources ourselves as organizers or organizations. I think that if we had a place that they could go and know that what was available was there, I think it would be to service the people and their needs, as well as each other, as we organize different things, and put our efforts together collectively. Thank you. So any other thoughts on either what's next here in Ohio, or if there's anybody that has insight around the immigration efforts here as it relates to in our jails?
Really quick, just ACLU has had ongoing litigation around people detained in ICE facilities due to COVID, and we've been able to get, I think, 20 people at this point freed through those means. We don't have active immigration organizing happening right now, but there have been some legal wins that have been very hopeful for us.
And for Hamilton County, when it comes to immigration detention, when someone's held just on a ICE holder, if they have a pending case with a bond, that is dealt with, but they are then transferred to Butler County and they're outside our purview. And that is something that our office is unable to try to get released once they've been transferred to Butler County and they have nothing else ongoing in Hamilton County.
Specific to ICE, the bail project also helps with immigration bonds. Just last week, we bailed out somebody from Ohio and got them transferred to Detroit to be able to live with family members. So we do help. It's just, it's not very often that we're in a position to where we can't help just due to the circumstances related to those cases. Now, when it comes to, the future, I definitely, I agree with Melekte that we need to, figure out what bail reform looks like and understanding who it actually impacts. It's impacting those who are mostly impacted also by poverty. And in this particular situation that we find ourselves in, we know that resources are being depleted at a faster rate because not just those who are justice involved, but other people are out of work. They also need food, housing assistance, employment needs. And so I think forward thinking, we need to be conscious of what the COVID period is and how it's going to impact the individuals that we are seeking to help. If we are going to help keep people out of jail with cite and release, if we're going to help, change, or aim for bond reform, bail reform, and we're going to keep more people out of jail or shorten the amount of time that they're going to be exposed to jail. We also have to be conscious of what does that mean when they're not in jail? What does that mean for keeping them in a house? What does that mean for getting them employed? What does that mean for educating not just them, but their family members now that education is also disturbed in those impoverished communities as well? So going forward, I don't want us to look backwards and fight from a position of pre-COVID. I want us still to accomplish all the things that we were aiming for pre-COVID, but also understanding that COVID itself is impacting our work in a significant way. And if we don't adapt our argument and our position and our resources to combat that as well, what we're going to find is that as this COVID period mellows, we're not going to have the same amount of attention. People aren't going to be caring as much about the people. And we're, as a result, going to be fighting a different war, very ill prepared to do so.
Thank you. I'll just also add that for PJI, we are obviously expanding throughout the state. So I've been primarily working with Hamilton County and Cuyahoga, and have recently started doing work in Montgomery County and Greene County, and meeting with some people up in Summit County. And so our overall goal is to really be able to provide community education and to continue to support the efforts that you all are doing throughout the state. We are going to be doing some online virtual training. We initially had something set up for Cuyahoga County, and right as we were planning it, and it was about to go off, we had to postpone it. So we're looking at doing that as a form of a virtual training, but also being able to work with some of the other counties as well throughout the state. And then in addition to that, we are going to be piloting a project where we're going to be working not only with community, but also the system actors, in the hope to bring the two together to create some change in the local area, and really looking forward to that. And then on top of that, we're also going to be working with the art community. So I have been connected with some awesome artists throughout the state, and I had some some great people lined up for Cuyahoga, and we have some people at our Hamilton County event. And so our hope is that providing this education will really aid to mobilize people, to get people involved in these actions that you all are talking about, and to allow them to be a voice in these different spaces. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there to the people that are watching. And most of you already know what I do, but just wanted to make sure that everybody just was kind of clear on the direction that we're going moving forward with our Arts for Justice grant. So I see Stephen Stephen, did you want to jump in?
I don't think so. No, I just appreciated Chrissy's questions about immigration. She asked the question, but honestly, top secret, Chrissy's actually one of the best resources in the state when it comes to immigration advocacy. So right back at you, Chrissy. Thank you for the questions. And I put up some of her links. Yeah, so thanks for that. In terms of not going backwards, I just can't say enough that we need to lift up those judges that are doing it right. And I think that's maybe a little bit of a hunting job we need to go on around the state and really find those places where they're doing it the best and say that that's not the farthest we could go. That now becomes the bare minimum. Like what we're doing right now to decarcerate and to prevent incarceration through pretrial reforms, the best ones happening in this state, that's now has to become the minimum. And then we have to go farther than that. We have to flip that conversation really strong right now. So I just, it's a global perspective on pretrial reform, where we are now, where we're going to go in the future. Let's really like put a stake in the ground and go farther than that.
So I know we're getting close to the end here. Any final words from any of our panelists before we close out? We do have the resource page that is up. People have put their email addresses in the chat box, but just wanted to give people opportunity if there was any last words that you wanted to share. All right, well, I want to thank all of our panelists for being here today. I hope that those who are watching were able to just learn a little bit about what's going on here in the state of Ohio. I know we have two of the larger areas that are represented here, but it's just really important that we continue to have this conversation around pretrial justice, not just, during this COVID-19, but also afterwards, and what it really means moving forward as we talk about the lives of people who are being detained in our jails currently, especially as it was already mentioned that these are people who should be presumed innocent, and a lot of times they're not. And so this is a health issue that we're dealing with. This is a health crisis, and it's critical that we continue to engage with our policymakers and engage with the community to make sure that people are knowledgeable about this particular topic. And so that's why I'm really fortunate to work with you all, just to be able to provide that added support to the work that you all are doing in the advocacy space. And so I just want to thank each of our panelists today, as well as our audience for being here with us. Thank you to Sharice for producing. This is our first time producing an event together. I'm sure it won't be our last, but we want to thank everyone and just say that if you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me. And then you can also subscribe to our page, University of Pretrial, where that's an online community that we have that's available for you all, as well as you can find any of our staff on our pretrial.org website. So thank you all again, and I hope that everyone has